The detestation of Bokrug. In the later days of Sarnath's glory, when its marble spires gleamed under the sun and cast long, arrogant shadows over the land of Manar, there stood 17 tower-like temples, dedicated to the gods. Among them, the temple of Zokalar was the mightiest. Many hundreds of cubits high it stood, its pinnacle piercing the heavens like a spear. It was here, beneath this vast edifice of stone and faith, that the doom of Sarnath would be sealed by a ritual as old as the city itself. Nahem, a young priest in the service of Zokalar, had often marveled at the grandeur of the temple, its vast halls lined with carved stone, the majestic central hall with the imposing and lifelike statue of the bearded god, draped in the richest silks. Yet, despite its beauty, a shroud of unease hung over him, whispering to him in moments of solitude, a faint echo of a time before Sarnath, before even the first stone of its mighty walls had been laid. It was in the midst of this unease that Nahem was summoned by the high priest Taran Voz to a secret meeting of which he mustn't speak on pain of death. He descended ancient stairs and was led through shadowy corridors that twisted deep beneath the temple's foundations. Even as a priest of the temple for many years, he could never have guessed at their existence. Here, in a cold and dreary chamber weakly lit by flickering torches, he found Taran Voz and a number of elder priests waiting, their expressions unreadable in the gloom. Nahem was awed and much worried, for he had rarely been in the presence of such assembly of elders, and never the direct object of their scrutiny. Without wasting words, they presented to him an ancient text, its pages brittle and yellowed with age, covered in symbols that seemed to writhe and change beneath his gaze. The words spoke of a rite, performed once every decade, to bind the spirit of the water-lizard god of the long-vanquished city of Ib. It was a rite that required the blood of a new priest, true in his faith of Zokalar, spilled upon a forgotten idol hidden deep beneath the temple. Nahem's blood ran cold as he read. The rite was said to secure the continued prosperity of Sarnath, but the text hinted at something darker, a pact forged in fear and secrecy. Was this offering truly to the glory of Zokalar, he wondered. The priests said nothing as Nahem raised his eyes from the page. The silence was oppressive, filled with unspoken threats. To refuse their will would be unthinkable, an act of treason against both the highest echelon of his religion and his city. To comply would mean reward, to become in time one of the elders or even high priest, honored, revered. Yet, in his heart, Nahem felt a growing dread, a premonition of doom that he could not shake. In the days that followed, having returned to his normal duties, his sleep was restless, plagued by dreams of green waters and the pale, bulbous eyes of strange beings watching from the depths. He awoke each night with a start, the taste of a dank liquid on his lips. On the night appointed by the high priest, feeling feverish and shaking, Nahem was led even further into the bowels of the temple than before. The air grew colder with each step, and a dampness clung to the walls, which were slick with moisture and something else, something that glowed faintly in the darkness, an unearthly green. At last they reached a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, so far into the depths that it must be 1,000 cubits to Zokalar's bright hall. At the chamber's center stood the lizard idol, grotesque and menacing, carved from a stone unlike any Nahem had ever seen, smooth and cold, yet alive with an inner light that pulsed like a beating heart. Around it, the elder priests gathered, their faces bathed in the green glow, eyes glazed and reflecting the same unnatural hue. Nahem's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, noticing how damp and cold the chamber was. The idol seemed to watch him, its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glinting with a cruel intelligence. He glanced at the elders, hoping for some sign of reassurance, but what he saw chilled him to his core. Their faces were twisted, their eyes bulging and watery. Under their relentless gaze, he forced himself to pick up the bronze dagger that was placed before him. He fumbled, but finally managed to cut himself, so blood trickled forth. Holding his hand over the ancient bowl, he started to fill it, realizing it would take a long while. Later, as the bowl was half full and he was feeling drowsy, in a moment of clarity, the truth struck him with the force of a hammer blow. The rite was not an act of devotion to Zokalar, but a grotesque offering to appease the god they had wronged. The elders were not priests of Sarnath, but in truth servants of the accursed water lizard, bound to him by blood. A cold sweat broke out on Nahem's brow as he realized that he had been chosen not for his faith, but for his ignorance. The blood rite was a trap, a means of binding a new soul to the foul lizard's service, to maintain the ancient pact and stave off the doom foretold by the high priest Taran Ish centuries ago, and that hovered over Sarnath like a storm cloud. Nahem knew he could not complete the rite. He refused to bind his blood to this unholy covenant. Anger filled him instead of fear. Summoning every ounce of courage, he reached for the bronze dagger and, with surprising power, drove it into the base of the lizard idol. The reaction was immediate and violent. The idol shuddered, and a terrible roar filled the chamber, a sound not of this world, but of some distant forgotten place where light and darkness mingled in chaos. The green light flared, blinding in its intensity, and the elders screamed. A hideous, inhuman wail that echoed through the temple's halls. With a surge of strength born of desperation, Nahem seized the bowl beside the idol, already filled with some of his own blood, and hurled it against the idol. The bowl shattered, the blood spilling across the chamber floor in a crimson flood. The ground beneath him trembled violently, and cracks began to spiderweb across the chamber walls. Ice-cold water rushed in as the green light grew brighter still, swallowing the room in its sickly glow. One by one, the elder priests fell, their bodies convulsing and twisting in unnatural shapes. Their faces, now fully transformed, bore the unmistakable features of the ancient Ibians, bulbous eyes bulging from their sockets, skin turned a pallid, fish-belly white. They collapsed to the ground, their forms disintegrating into foul liquids even as the chamber's ceiling began to cave in. Feeling life and purpose returning to him, Nahem turned and fled. He sprinted up the staircase as fast as he could, the blood loss slowing his pace. He could feel the force of the foreign god's wrath behind him, a wave of fury that surged through the earth, tearing apart the foundations of Sarnath's greatest temple. Nahem burst into the open air, the cool night breeze hitting his face like a slap. Behind him, the great temple of Zokalar crumbled, its 1,000-cubit height reduced to rubble in a matter of moments. A great cloud of dust and green light rose into the sky, a beacon of doom for all to see. He looked back only once, just in time to see the temple's last tower fall, its marble stones shattering like glass. In that moment, he saw a vision of Sarnath's future, a city sinking beneath the dark waters of the lake, its proud towers swallowed by the depths, just as Ib had been swallowed long ago. With a heavy heart, Nahem turned away from the ruins and fled into the wilderness, leaving Sarnath behind forever. He knew now that the doom was inevitable, and that he could not save the city from its fate. He could only save himself. As he disappeared into the night, the green light faded from the sky, leaving only darkness and the distant echo of a name that would haunt him forever. Bokrug. There were only 2 decades remaining until the 1,000-year celebration of the just and glorious destruction of the evil city of Ib. The young king, Nargis Hay, surveying the rubble after the strange earthquake from on top of the Akurian hill, swore before priests and nobles that the most holy tower of Zokalah would be raised even higher and finished well before that momentous occasion. The last survivor from Sarnath. I am the end of my line, the last living soul who beheld the marble streets of Sarnath before it was swallowed by the fog and the night. I was just a boy then, scarcely old enough to comprehend the gravity of what I witnessed, but old enough to remember the horror that claimed my city. Now, as an old man, I have fought the call of that dark lake my entire life, but I feel its pull stronger now, as if the waters themselves are reaching out to claim what remains of my blood. As I said, I grew up in Sarnath, a fabled city of wonder and splendor, where the temple towers rose high into the heavens, and the wealth of many nations flowed through its gates. My father was a seer, a man of visions and dark premonitions. He spoke often of the city of Ib and of the strange beings that once dwelt by the lake before Sarnath's rise to glory. He warned of their ancient curse, a curse that would one day return to claim us all. He was one of the few in the city that gave that warning of doom any heed. I didn't understand then, as I do now, what he meant by his words, but I remember the night the fog came, rolling in from the lake, thick and impenetrable. My father had seen it in his dreams and had made preparations. He took me by the hand and led me, my mother and my older sister, out of the city. I can still hear the sounds as we rushed away, the laughter of the great celebration that was turning to screams, the drums echoing in the mist, and the whispers of inhuman voices. We fled to the mountains and watched as the city of Sarnath was swallowed by the fog. The waters rose, and from their depths emerged shapes that defied understanding. Ghosts of the dead, shadows of creatures that never should have been. I saw them with my own eyes, those unspeakable things moving through the fog, and I knew that Sarnath was lost. For years my father tried to understand the curse that had befallen our city. He carried with him an object taken from the ruins of Ib, a stone tablet inscribed with symbols that no one could decipher. He believed it held the key to understanding what had happened, and perhaps even to lifting the curse, but he never found the answers he sought. He died years after, haunted by the visions, still tormented by the knowledge that the curse had not ended with Sarnath. I have spent my entire life trying to escape that curse, to resist the call of the lake. I went from place to place, never settling, hoping that distance would dull the pull. But no matter how far I traveled, the dreams would come. In the dead of night, I would find myself standing at the shore of that dark, still lake, the fog rolling in, the drums beating in the deep. I would wake, my heart pounding. My father's stone tablet, now in my possession, was as heavy as ever. I had tried to get rid of the damned object for years, but somehow it always seemed inconvenient, when I finally managed to work up the nerve. As the years passed, I began to understand that the curse was not just in the tablet or in the lake, but in me. It is in my blood. I am the last of the Sarnathians, the final remnant of a city that defied the ancient gods and paid the ultimate price. And now, as an old man, I feel the curse tightening around me like a noose. The lake calls to me, more urgently now than ever before. I am happy that I never had children of my own, to avoid even the possibility of passing on this curse. Last night, I dreamt of the lake again, but this time, it was different. The fog was thicker, the drums louder, and I saw figures emerging from the mist. They were my ancestors, their faces twisted with sorrow and rage, their eyes empty and dark. They reached out to me, beckoning me to join them, to return to the place where it all began. I knew then that my time was running out, so I made my decision. I would return to the lake, confront the curse that has plagued my family for generations, and perhaps find some semblance of peace. I set out before dawn, the stone tablet heavy in my pocket, its cold weight a constant reminder of what awaited me. As I descended from the mountains, I could feel the fog gathering around me, thicker with every step I took toward that accursed lake. On the path, as I drew nearer to the lake, I noticed strange figures moving in the distance. My heart quickened. I knew those figures. I had seen them in my nightmares. They were the descendants of those who once lived in Ib, the strange beings my ancestors had so cruelly destroyed. The frog folk, as my father had called them, though he dared never speak that name aloud. These creatures, with their sloping foreheads and bulging eyes, were not merely figments of a forgotten past. They were real, and they were here, performing some kind of ritual. I crouched behind a boulder, hidden from view, and watched as they gathered around a circle of stone obelisks, unlike any I had ever seen. The obelisks were tall and slender, carved with the same symbols that adorned the tablet I carried. They pulsed with a faint green glow that seemed to grow stronger with each beat of my heart. The frog folk chanted in low, grunting tones, a language both alien and eerily familiar, echoing with a rhythm that stirred something deep within me. I felt the tablet grow warm, as if responding to their chants. The fog around me thickened, and the air grew heavy with the scent of wet earth and ancient things. I watched, transfixed, as one of the frogfolk raised its arms to the sky, holding an object aloft, a tablet, much like the one I carried, but larger and darker, its surface glistening with moisture. Then, as if in response to some unseen command, the waters of the lake began to churn and bubble. The ground beneath me trembled, and I heard the low rumble of drums from deep below the earth, the same drums that had haunted my dreams for so long. I could feel the pull of the lake growing stronger, urging me to step forward, to join the ritual, to give myself to whatever lay beneath those dark waters. I knew I should have turned back then, should have fled back to the safety of the mountains, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Perhaps it was the accursed tablet, or perhaps it was a deep, unspoken need to understand, to know the truth of what had happened to my city, to my family. I watched as the frog folk continued their ritual, their chants growing louder and more frantic. The obelisks glowed brighter, casting long shadows across the ground, and the waters of the lake began to rise, creeping slowly toward the circle of stones. In that moment, I understood. The obelisks were markers, ancient sentinels that had been raised long before Sarnath, long before the first stone of our city had been laid. They were a conduit to the forces that lay beneath the lake, forces that had been angered by my ancestors' hubris and cruelty. I felt a cold dread settle over me, a fear unlike any I had ever known. I wanted to run, to flee from that place, but my legs would not move. I was trapped, caught between the need to know and the terror of what I might discover. The fog swirled around me, thick and impenetrable, and I felt a presence there, just beyond the edge of sight, watching, waiting. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me gave way, and I was falling. I tumbled down a slope, the fog blinding me, the sound of the drums growing louder and louder in my ears. I landed hard on a cold, wet surface, the breath knocked from my lungs. I lay there for a moment, dazed and disoriented, the fog pressing in around me, the drums now deafening. When I finally managed to push myself up, I realized I was at the water's edge. The lake stretched out before me, dark and still, the fog hanging over it like a shroud. The frogfolk were gone, their chants silenced, but the obelisks remained, glowing with a sickly green in the mist. I could feel the stone tablet burning hot against my skin, as if urging me forward to step into the water. And so I did. I waded into the lake, the water lapping first at my ankles, then my knees, then my waist. The fog closed in around me, and I could feel a presence there, just beyond the veil made by the fog. I took out the tablet and held it out before me, its surface now blazing with a green light that cut through the fog like a knife. I don't know what I expected to find in those waters. Redemption, perhaps, or maybe just an end to the torment that had plagued my family for generations. But as I stood there, waist deep in the dark lake, I knew that there was no escaping the doom of Sarnath. It was a part of me, as much as the blood in my veins or the air in my lungs. It had been passed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, a legacy of fear and madness that could not be denied. The fog began to swirl around me, faster and faster, the drums beating louder and louder, until I thought my head would split from the sound. And then, in the midst of the cacophony, I heard it. A voice, low and rumbling, speaking in a language I could not understand, but somehow knew all the same. It was the voice of the lake, the voice of Bockrug, calling me home. I took a step forward, then another, the water now up to my chest, the tablet in my hand burning like fire. I could see shapes moving in the fog just beyond the edge of sight, watching me, waiting. I knew them. They were my family, the ones who had escaped the doom of Sarnath, but had died many years ago. They reached out to me, their eyes empty and dark. I took another step, and then another, until the water was up to my neck. I could feel the cold creeping into my bones. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, ready to let the water take me, to finally end the torment that had haunted my family for so long. But just as I was about to surrender to the depths, I felt a hand on my shoulder, pulling me back, dragging me out of the water. I opened my eyes, and there, standing before me, was my father. He looked just as he had the day he led us from Sarnath, his eyes filled with the same sadness, the same regret. He spoke, the voice soft and filled with sorrow. "You must not give in," he said. "The curse is not yours to bear alone." And then he was gone, and I was alone again, standing at the water's edge, the fog lifting, the drums silent. I looked down at the tablet in my hand, its surface now cold and dark, the green light gone. I knew then that my father was right. I could not give in, could not let the doom take me, as it had taken so many others. I cast the tablet out into the lake, and then turned and walked away, back towards the mountains, the fog slowly receding behind me. I do not know what awaits me now, or if the curse will ever truly be lifted, but I know that I must try, for the sake of my family, for the sake of those who came before me. I am the last of my line, the final remnant of a city that defied the gods and paid the ultimate price. But I am still here, still fighting, still resisting the call of the lake, and as long as I draw breath, I will continue to fight, to resist, to live.